think it's exactly news at this point that the economic outlook for the state of North Dakota, and indeed the nation, it's not pretty. As it turns out, you can't just shut down the national economy. You can't just, for the most part, shut down the state economy without some dire consequences. Now, we're having a debate about reopening the economy and how quickly it should go. Some people think we shouldn't be doing it. Some people think we should be doing it a lot faster. And there's a lot of viewpoints in between. Into that debate comes a report from North Dakota State University Center for the Study of Public Choice and Private Enterprise, which paints a gloomy forecast for the state's economies. Their model predicts that North Dakota's total wages and salaries will decrease anywhere between 20% and 60%. They're predicting that the North Dakota labor force will decrease between 7.5% and 15%. The unemployment rate, they're talking, may increase anywhere from 5% to more than 20%. Gross state product, the model predicting North Dakota's GSP will decrease by between 25% and perhaps more than 50%. Total tax collections may decrease by more than 50%. That's not pretty. Here to talk with me about it is Dr. Jeremy Jackson from NDSU. Jeremy, how are you doing?
Hi, Rob. Doing pretty well. Thanks for having me on.
So tell us about this report. I just read through some of the findings from the executive summary, but tell us about the genesis of the report. I mean, you put one interesting caveat in there. Not interesting. I think completely fair, completely transparent caveat in there saying that a forecast model is not intended to be a perfect prediction. This is not intended to be the proverbial writing on the wall. This is basically something that could happen, right? Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think that's very accurate, and I appreciate the fact that you have pointed that out. I think that one thing that we all know now from just how the progression of the pandemic has been that there's one thing that we know, that models are usually wrong. And this is no real exception to that. The report that we put out has, of course, in it a bunch of assumptions.
Yeah. Well, let's first answer that question though about models and forecasts. If they're not accurate, sure, why do them? I think a lot of people hear that. That's what they're wondering.
Yeah, and they give us information, and that's the key thing that I think is given here, is that, and like you said, it's really just confirming what I think a lot of us already know, is that the potential outcome for our state could be very, very bad. But it's still just a potential. That's one thing that the report also mentions, is that there's this thing called a confidence interval, right? The range of possible outcomes is pretty big. But the fact that these bad outcomes are possible tells us that we need to be, at least prepared for the fact that, like I said, total tax collections could decline by as much as 50%. I mean, if worse comes to it, it could even be worse than that.
Well, I think that's a certainty. I mean, you look at how dependent we are, and again, it depends on which flavor of tax collections we're talking about. We talk a lot about oil and gas tax collections. A lot of those don't go into the general fund, which is sort of the state's checkbook. A lot of those go into reserve funds, which has a different, I'm not saying that's unimportant, but obviously it has a different sort of impact than maybe a decline in the sales tax revenue, which goes into the general fund, which is just the state's general revenues that they spend. So it's hard. I mean, there's a lot of different impacts, and you're right. I mean, a lot of the findings in your report, I mean, those are big gaps. I mean, when you're saying that North Dakota's total wages and salaries will decrease between 20% and 60%, that's not very precise.
No, but that also does account for the range of the scenarios that were considered in the report. So it's dependent kind of on, like, the report actually says, we looked at a price of $40, $25, $15, and $5 for West Texas Intermediate. I can't predict nobody can predict what oil prices are going to do right now.
Well, if you could, if you could, I would like to join. I would like to join your investment, your investment group, and we can make billions and billions of dollars, knowing what the always volatile energy markets are going to do, oil markets are going to do.
But there's uncertainty around that, and also, the other thing that we put into the model to come up with the scenarios was national unemployment. And we also don't know exactly where those numbers are going to go. So some of the uncertainty in the model comes from the fact that those pieces of external forces on the economy, we don't really know what's going to happen with them either.
Yeah, well, and that's the problem. Is one of the things I thought was interesting that you wrote in there was that you use, if you're going to do a forecast like this, you're going to use historical data, right? I mean, that's
correct.
That's really all we have to go on if we're trying to look into the future and say, well, what's going to happen is you look at the past and say, well, what happened in the past, right? The problem, though, is when in the past have we been in a situation like this? And maybe you could roll back the clock and say, well, like we had the Spanish flu or something, but that also happened in a very different sort of America with a much smaller population and a much different sort of economy. I mean, in 1918, America was still, most people were employed in America were farmers. That is not the case anymore. It's a very different economy. So what can you even look at to say, oh, well, based on what happened in the past, this is what we think is going to happen in the future? This is unprecedented.
It's extremely unprecedented, and you're absolutely right. So it actually, the model makes predictions based upon the assumption that everybody's behavior is unchanged from what it was, say, last year. And we know, even as the economy opens up, I mean, supposedly there are restaurants in Fargo that have reopened to having, patrons come inside. I haven't gone to a restaurant yet. I don't know when I will. There's lots of people who still aren't going about their activities like they used to. And that change in behavior is not something that we can account for in the model. We can't really predict how people's behavior is fundamentally going to change, at least not in this exercise.
Well, and it's hard, and you don't know, even if those restaurants reopen, I mean, people develop new habits. It's hard to think that people are going to develop lasting habits over the course of a few months, but maybe if you get used to living your life in a new way or making different choices, you're going to continue making some of those choices even after this ends. So I don't think we know. I mean, this is such a profound impact. It changes the way people live. It has changed the way people are living their lives of necessity because there's all sorts of restrictions in place. And it may impact the economic choices that they're going to make going forward, even when a lot of those restrictions disappear.
Right. And I think one of the interesting things about how I did the forecast was that all of the forecasted impacts on the state of North Dakota were based upon these external influences of the oil price and national unemployment. So it didn't take into account, say, the fact that, like you mentioned, we shut down essentially North Dakota's economy. We made a bunch of businesses close. That's not in the model. The only thing that's in the model is sort of these external forces. But part of what that tells us is that North Dakota, well, and you know this, we're kind of unique as a state, right? We actually are exporters.
Right.
We need the people who buy our exports
right.
to buy the stuff that we produce.
Right.
We need them to go back to work.
Yeah.
Also, if we're going to get our economy moving again.
If another else, start driving to work again, so you have to fill your car up with gas, and you could buy some of our oil. That would be very, very nice at this point. Because I mean, the problem is that some of this stuff just doesn't. I mean, normally you would think of like fuel consumption. It's kind of an inelastic thing, right? I mean, a certain amount of it, you got to go to work. You got to get the kids to school, right? I mean, the buses are going to run. I mean, there's a certain amount of that's just going to happen, and it's relatively inelastic no matter what happens to the economy. But in this situation, it's become very elastic, and all of a sudden it's just, if I'm not driving my car, I can't just go out and like charity buy gasoline to try to help the economy. Where the hell am I going to put it? My lawnmower can's already full, so I don't have anywhere else. I don't have any more extra capacity for this. So yeah, I mean that's a problem for us.
You can go buy a Hummer for the economy.
Go buy the Hummer for the economy. Yeah, right now. Yeah, maybe with your paycheck, not
I wish.
Yeah, not with mine. So I mean, this is sort of the problem that we're in. And there's going to be some uncertainty hanging over the economy for some time to come, which I think kind of gets into people aren't just going to immediately go back to the old ways of doing things. Something happened to us, and there's going to be some lingering anxiety, some lingering fears, and rightfully so, that are going to change people's behaviors, and we just don't know what that is yet.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, I don't even know how my own behavior is going to be changed by this. So it's really,
I mean, because you look at it too. Tourism's another big thing in North Dakota. How many people are going to take a vacation this year? How many people are going to cancel their hunting trips this fall? I don't know. Maybe a lot. At
this point in time, I'd just like to go. I'd like to be able to drive and visit my mother who lives in Oklahoma. Like you said, right. I'd like to take advantage of this nice low gas price and take a road trip, but can't really do it.
Again, that kind of stuff is tough. So if you were advising North Dakota policymakers, right, because we have some decisions to make in front of us, at some point I think we're probably going to see a special legislative session to address some of the budgeting issues or whatnot. If you were advising them, obviously just at a very top level, what would you say?
So, I don't want to make too many policy prescriptions. The whole point that I've kind of made with this report is just we need to have some contingency plans, right? We need to at least have an eye to see that we could be in a really bad situation. Now, I'll leave it to policymakers to think about how they want to solve that. And there's always the potential, and I know everybody kind of wants to have a rosy picture, but there is actually the potential that things could end up being not nearly as gloomy as the report actually says.
Like the V-shaped recovery we're hearing certain optimists talk about.
But it's kind of a situation. I don't know what policy can really get us out of the potential mess that we may be in. If tax revenues really do fall by, say, 50%, that's pretty massive.
Well, I mean, that's tough. That's tough for us. And it's remarkable on just how many fronts, because obviously you have the coronavirus that's just shutting down. That has, well, I don't want to say shut down, has severely inhibited just regular old commerce, just going to the store and buying stuff like we do. But then you also have the we're producers in the States, so you have the oil industry that's been hit, but also the ag industry. I mean, again, food is typically a pretty inelastic thing. I mean, we're all going to eat, right? I mean, at some point we got to put food in our tummies. It's an imperative. But some of the problems, like you look at what's happening with the meat packers, right? The meat packing industry, and some of our congressional delegation is looking into that and looking into price fixing, because we've had some weird stuff going on where meat packing plants, because of the virus, have been coming offline. And yet, despite that narrowing in supply of meat, like the prices for ranchers, for people who are actually producing the pigs and the chickens and the cows to be slaughtered, has also gone down as well. I mean, it's just all across North Dakota's economy. I mean, it's really hard because it's such a unique situation, which we've been talking about this entire podcast. It's hard to go through and quantify what the real world impacts of all of that is going to be.
Well, and it's not just the fact that farmers are being impacted through the prices of what they're producing, but also farmers, they buy equipment, and our state produces a lot of equipment that farmers need. But I imagine that the demand for the equipment that we produce in our state, which actually a lot of our equipment even gets shipped internationally. Again, those are further effects that are going to, put some pressure on our economy here.
The challenge in all of this is that it's such a fluid situation. I have a feeling, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, I have a feeling that if you did this report 2 weeks from now, there might be a lot of things that are different, better, worse. I don't know, but that's how quickly things are changing. I mean, we're learning new things about the virus. We have new forecasts about the virus coming out all the time. We're learning new things about the economy all the time. It is tough. It is a fluid situation, and it's going to take constant monitoring day to day, to figure out what's going on. Am I wrong about that? I mean, that's kind of how I'm looking at it. Like,
no, you're not wrong. However, the report was a special release of actually what we are going to be producing on a quarterly basis. So the model itself uses quarterly data. So it'll actually take a while for the current things that are happening now to actually make it into the data of the model itself.
Yeah.
And that's one of the tricky things. And you know this too, even though we're in the second quarter now, it's going to be several quarters before most economic data even begins to trickle in.
Sure. I mean, a lot of it, like I was looking, the North Dakota Office of Management and Budget puts out a monthly revenue report, general fund revenue report. And, the one that just came out, I think, what was it, last week, looked pretty good. You really didn't see a lot of impact there, but that's because there's a delay in how all this stuff is reported. We got, just this morning, I wrote about the job openings report from North Dakota Job Service, which is, not a comprehensive number because it's just, they're looking just at online postings because I suppose those are easy to measure. But, we're starting to see the beginnings of it show up there. I mean, our month over month and even, comparing this April to last year's April, numbers were down for job postings. Numbers were up for people looking for work. So, but again, not as dramatic maybe as we would have thought. But again, we haven't really seen the full impact yet. So it's going to be a while, even like you said, before we get the full numbers. Well, I have the full report up if you want to read it. I have it in my column, which you can read in Fargo Forum, Grand Forks Herald, Jamestown Sun, Tickets and Press. I'll put up a link to it as well in the description for this podcast. If you want to read the report, it's worth your time, because this is it's the problem in front of us, right? Or at least about as good an outline, I think, of the problem in front of us, economically speaking, as we could get for North Dakota at this point. Jeremy, any last thoughts?
Oh, the only last thought that I think I'd put in is just that opening up our own economy is not enough. North Dakota, if we open up by ourselves, it's not going to be the thing that pushes us over and helps us recover. Our economy at least needs other places to open up as well.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks.